working this over.
Okay. This is the October 1st, 2025 meeting of the Portsmouth Energy Advisory Committee. Take the roll. Kevin Charette.
Here.
Councilor Kate Cook.
Here.
Tracy Cameron.
Here.
Peter Somsich.
Here.
Tom Rooney has an excused absence. Betsy Blaisdell is out of the country. Herb Lloyd, I have to tell you with sadness, has had to resign. Haven't been able to talk to Herb about that. Did that last week. And Ben D'Antonio is not here. We had two items of business tonight. The committee had really wanted to talk to Community Power Coalition, ask questions about measures that the coalition has taken to strengthen their financial position. And also what's in the pipeline for new things that will be great for the communities that we serve. I think this group worked on a communication plan around the rates in August. We're happy to say the attrition has been 54 customers so far. And God may got us that data. But with that, I'll just turn it over to committee members to ask questions unless Jason and Jackson, you and Andrew would like to make any introductory remarks.
So we'll just say, well, thank you for the invitation. We always like to have the opportunity to interact with our committees, and we're here tonight, as you teed up, to really answer any questions you may have. Certainly, we can focus on the items of tightening things up in terms of our risk procedures, cash flow, and our future outlook, both on the rates side of things, as well as discussing what we're doing in terms of our projects and programs development, maybe some of what's going on in the regulatory and legislative front as well, if that's of interest. So yeah, we're really here to serve your needs. I'm happy to kind of dive into some of that content to start if you'd like, or kind of do a question and answer format, whatever's best for you.
And maybe you can just tell us a little bit about your roles at the coalition and your backgrounds.
Absolutely. I'll start and I'll turn it over to Andrew. So I'm the Director of Member Services for CPC&H. I've been in that role about 6 months. I've been with the coalition on a staff side for a year now. Prior to that, I was the resilience manager for the city of Dover, New Hampshire. So I've been the community power lead for the city of Dover. Served on the board of directors. So my history with the coalition goes back to the early formation days before any of the programs had launched. You, Andrew.
Yeah, thank you. Andrew Hatch, I'm the engagement manager for CPC&H, and I started in 2023 with a slightly different role in terms of outreach and engagement, the same concept. And I've been working in the member services group, firstly under Henry Herndon and now with Jackson. Since then, my main focus has been assisting on member communities to move through the process of joining the coalition, preparing to launch. And last year we launched 44 communities around the state. And so my role now more recently has been encompassing more engagement with our what we call operate communities such as Portsmouth. And I know I had conversations early on when I started with Councillor Tabor and others regarding sort of key account outreach and so forth, and very pleased to be here tonight.
Great. Thank you both for coming. Ben D'Antonio is one of our committee members. Tracy Cameron. Kevin Charette, you both know, who was vice chair of the board of the coalition and worked very hard.
He did.
And Peter Somsich is also on our committee. And Councillor Kate Cook is my colleague So we have two counselors on this committee. And then staff, we have Jillian Harris from the planning department and Stephanie Secord. Public Information Office, Public Information. There we go.
Counselor, I might suggest maybe Jackson, just to kind of ground everybody a little bit, you know, we don't want to look too much in the rearview mirror, but ground everybody in kind of perhaps the bit of the root causes behind the kind of deteriorating financial condition that you guys are, you know, you're going to talk a little bit for going forward in terms of shoring things up. But I think for this group, it would be helpful both in terms of the, you know, the PPA that you guys were attempting to get into, as well as just the overall financial situation over the past 12 months that, you know, I'm confident you're turning the corner, but I think it'd be valuable to have a little bit of historical background before we jump into that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to talk through that a bit. So, you know, this past winter was really the coldest winter in the last 10 years in the state of New Hampshire. Any power supply company that had open positions that was subject to the market conditions at that time experienced losses as a result. We did have some significant open positions on behalf of CPC&H and therefore needed to draw down joint reserves as an effect of that to cover the increased costs associated with that winter. Part of the amount of open positions that we had to deal with was a result, as Kevin mentioned, of not coming to an agreement with a PPA with a biomass facility based in New Hampshire. We were hopeful that would come to term. That biomass facility was purchased by another entity, and really at the last minute, as a result of that acquisition, the deal fell through. So that was unfortunate. I think a lot of lessons have been learned since then. You know, the joint reserves, that is one of their purposes. Obviously, we try to avoid with our risk strategies a drawdown of joint reserves to that degree. And, you know, we've really tightened up our hedging strategy with the risk management committee. We have a much improved cash flow cost of service model that's updated on a weekly basis that we're using for our financial projections. That is all tied into improved data flows between our vendors and ourselves, Calpine Energy Solutions, mainly Ascend Analytics and the coalition. So those have undergone vast improvements since that time. In addition to that, we've evaluated our energy risk management policies and regulations, and those have gone through some housekeeping and other types of updates, looking in the rearview mirror of what occurred. And in addition to that, we've just contracted with the Energy Authority to do a third-party evaluation of our risk procedures, and we'll be doing that every 2 years. That's part of that sort of policy process. So, you know, we've taken a hard look at what's occurred. We're very optimistic about the coalition's finances going forward. I would say right now we are really at the bottom, and we'll be coming out of that with, you know, positive net margins going through this rate period. And then, you know, we expect to set rates to cover costs going forward. So we don't really see any long-term issue in terms of cash flow. In addition to that, you know, when we talk about sort of rate context, we can get into a little bit of how things have changed there in terms of comparisons between the coalition and utility rate setting practices. But, you know, we could be looking at different opportunities to maybe set rates for longer periods. So these are the things that the RMC will be evaluating. And so I'm happy to speak to that more in a little bit, but I'll pause there and see if you want any more sort of background context on that subject.
On the PPA, one thing that we as novices here in the room didn't really understand is one of the lessons learned. You guys did a little bit of, you know, debrief after that situation was, you know, perhaps we shouldn't have gone into business with a firm that was in bankruptcy. And, you know, again, just as amateurs here, we're kind of, that seems pretty apparent that you wouldn't, your first big PPA contract would be with a firm that was in bankruptcy. And so kind of, can you just shed some light on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think So the RMC evaluated full scope of options with this PPA over many months. They visited the facility, took a tour of it. They were impressed with what they saw. I think some of the thought process there was, came back to bite us, but it was an attractive price at that time that would have served, 30% of the portfolio, helped drive some of our cost competitiveness. So that was attractive. It was a clean, well-run facility from everything that we could see at that point. In addition, it was, helping support the economy of the North Country. We have many members in the North Country that seemed to offer some additional economic value to that region of the state. And so those were some of the factors. I agree with you. I mean, I obviously, there were some considerations there, and we do have new leadership now on the staff side as well.
Yeah, and just one more related on that. So knowing they were in bankruptcy and, wishing to come out of bankruptcy and often, be purchased, that contract, I'm sure with the legal representation that the Community Power has, there were stipulations in that contract, should the PPA be bought, that you'd be protected, but ultimately it didn't seem that that was the case, or at least it wasn't pursued.
Apparently what occurred, granted, I was not deeply involved with this process.
Yeah.
Was that the person who had signed, the counterparty representative that had signed the contract was not authorized to sign that contract, and therefore they considered it void.
On their side or ours? Our side.
On both sides, I guess. Yeah.
One question I had was, in the current rate, how many cents of what portion of the rate is replenishing reserves?
It's about 0.8 cents. And I will note that this is not an accelerated reserve accrual. There were initial targets, joint reserve targets that were set as part of our amendment to the risk management policies. Those goalposts have effectively been moved. And that is to not, require an enhanced reserve accrual with increased, rates right now. So basically, the goalpost got moved out, so it's a more realistic pattern of rates.
And just one more looking back, and then I'll cease. The risk management policy and procedure was very comprehensive.
Yes.
There were talent on the board and staff in that space, including the CEO. And then you had two highly qualified vendors, Ascend Analytics and Calpine. Can you just, how did the controls not work effectively given what was in place? There seems like to be Jackson, a lot of eyes on the procurement process.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
How would transactions or open position, excessive open positions kind of skirt the procedures that were in place?
It didn't. The policies worked as intended.
Okay.
There was a series of violations of those policies that racked up, and a over 100-page sort of confidential, detailed analysis was done on exactly what occurred.
Okay.
And the result of that occurrence. And I can't really speak to that anymore, I've said. But, we're in a new era of people taking leads in those areas that they're supposed to be. There's, as part of the update to the regulations and the policy, there are very descriptive responsibilities for our risk controls and who's responsible for what. And there's a larger, I'll say, delegation of authority within those, maintaining those risk controls now than there previously was.
Thank you.
Peter?
So appreciate all the additional information you gave us, but I gotta say, I'm not that particularly satisfied with it. Because I remember initially when we went into this as a brand new community looking at this, we were assured very clearly that we had very competent people, top-notch people looking into these things, that we were in good hands, And we went out and told residents of Portsmouth the same thing.
Okay.
And as Kevin mentioned, a company that is in the phase of bankruptcy, you would think that would be the first red flag that goes up to say, you know, if we're gonna do any business with a company like that, you better have an ironclad legal framework that protects you from anything that could happen as a result of that bankruptcy. Now, you say that there were people making mistakes on both sides. I assume you're saying both on the biomass plant as well as our side. You know, that doesn't give me a lot of confidence. Also, when something like this happens, you would think that we have a good legal case to recover some of the money and our reputational reputational harm that we were done by what this company did with not honoring that contract. I haven't heard anybody talking about what we think we can do legally against what happened to us. And now you're saying we have a whole new set of guidelines and safeguards and so forth, which sounds very much like what I used to hear in the beginning when we went into this enterprise. So I guess I'm not saying just because it didn't work out the first time, it wouldn't work out the second time, just saying, and you mentioned just a minute ago, you can't go into more details, but you know, we need to know and have details in order to tell people in Portsmouth who signed up for this, that we are certain that this time the safeguards are in place and they weren't last time. So that's just my feeling right now, that I'm not totally convinced. I want to be, but I want to make sure that I don't represent things to other people that we can't back up either legally or financially. And I understand that our goal initially as a Community Power Coalition member, we were trying to keep our rates lower than Eversource. And I understand that they too have advantages that we don't have. However, that was something we told people here in Portsmouth, that that would be always our goal. Even if we can't achieve it all the time, that would be our goal. And I'm not sure if I can say that anymore. So these are just some of my concerns. And I have some other issues that are unrelated to what happened previously that I'll ask you later.
Okay, well, thank you for voicing your concerns. It's always important to hear concerns from our member communities. You know, we have new staff leadership. We've staffed up significantly since the early days of the operation. This, you know, was by definition a startup organization that serves its members to the best of its capabilities at all times. It's member driven. With representation of governance from the board of directors, the risk management committee that are overseeing operations. The policies and the regulations is not that they were broken by any means. They just needed to be reevaluated after 3 years of operating and in light of some of what happened. But you know, some of the safeguards and the controls were implemented and did work as intended. You know, in terms of rate competitiveness, it is.
Just stop you there. You said it worked as intended.
Yep.
But something went wrong. So if you're telling me now you have systems in place that are going to work as intended, that doesn't give me a whole lot of confidence. Previous experience showed that even when you think you have a safeguard in place, it didn't work. So why should I believe it this time?
Well,
what's different? What's different from previously that I should be confident
we have a
this can't
much
happen
larger
again?
delegation of authority, and we have the right people working on the right things, the right data flows in place, a very sophisticated cash flow cost of service model that was not being used prior to this incident. We have immense safeguards with any contract evaluation now that goes through both the risk management committee, Ascend Analytics, and Calpine when they have to do with our portfolio. That was not in place prior, so that is a big improvement in terms of evaluating, including our attorneys, who I didn't mention as well. I mean, we've really done a lot, and a lot of it is laid out. It's in the public record. All of our meetings are open to the public. You can review any of the board materials, any of the RMC materials, for the most part, that are part of this process. So, we, as a coalition, we don't have shareholders. We do what we can on behalf of our communities, customers within those communities. Obviously, we understand that rate competitiveness is a very important part of what we do. So, in Portsmouth, the date, through July, which was our latest reporting figures, customers have saved about $2.5 million. Right? Obviously, we hope to get back to a place where we're providing a rate advantage. You spoke about the change in procurement practices by the utilities. This was a major shift. When this whole thing started, utilities were on load following fixed contracts that had a risk premium. Their rates were set for those 6 months periods such that, the costs were known. Under the directive of the PUC, that all changed. Now Eversource and other utilities are floating 50% in the market, and therefore the rates that they're setting are proxy rates. They do not know what their costs will end up being for those periods. And the terms in which those sort of under or over collections are reconciled are also not totally clear. They have about a year, we think, but that's under, again, PUC directive. We're coming into a period where the governor has not reappointed the chair of the Public Utilities Commission. There will be a shakeup at the PUC. We've heard public comments from the consumer advocate, who's very concerned that the default utilities are sort of as a backstop floating that much of the portfolio on the market and what that will mean. And we're obviously evaluating what we can do ourselves to potentially break away from utility default cycles to provide advantages in other forms. In addition, we're looking at obviously contracts. We're not gonna, I don't think we'll ever go into or try to go into business with the party like we did before. Through the Aspire program, which is the annual solicitation program to increase renewable energy. We're seeing some attractive proposals come through that from a number of developers, but they'll have to be evaluated on cost basis. We will not be signing up for these projects unless they provide, cost benefit when looking at long-term outlooks on price.
So can I just clarify what you just said about the PUC?
Sure.
I assume it's correct that now that they can float 50% independently of fixed contracts, that also gives them the leverage of recovering losses if they have it, which we can't do. It's one of our big disadvantages. I mean, we had advantage over them because they had to fix it in 6 months and they couldn't change it. Now they can do more, but we can never recover losses if we have them. So we can't plan on offering something that is compatible financially, because we can't assume that a year later we can recover that loss like Eversource could do if they make the case for it.
Yeah, I mean, it's different. What we have is we have joint reserves that can be used to cover losses. We try to not use joint reserves to cover
right.
losses.
And as far as the PUC changes, can you say anything more about how might that be beneficial to the coalition? The fact that PUC is being shaken up by the governor with regard.
I mean, we don't know quite yet. We don't know who the next appointee will be. I will just say that, this change to the current practices was mainly driven by the former chair, from my understanding.
And I think triggered by by this agreement that the PUC made with like long-term contract for Eversource for annual increases.
So there's the two sides of the bill, right? There's what's been happening on the delivery side, what's happening on the supply side of the bill. I mean, the delivery side is a whole nother set of considerations.
And did you have questions?
Do you have a expectation around the time frame associated with trying to be better than default service rates?
I mean, it's a good question. We don't know when and to what degree these reconciliations are going to happen. So, it's hard to say with any certainty what rates are going to look like going into the next period. I know that's not a great answer. We think that reconciliations will come to term at least by the August rate period of next year. And that will have an impact and, you know, there could be a cost competitive advantage that comes with that for the coalition. But like I said, you know, the market is the market, it moves up and down. We'll be tracking it, we'll be providing the most cost competitive products that we can as an organization. At the end of the day, you know, customers they're benefiting from having choice, right? They're benefiting from choice driving cost competitiveness. They are free to leave on a month-to-month basis. They can leave, they can come back, they can go to a third-party provider if they want. So that choice is theirs. We've made significant improvements to all of our program websites to help customers be able to make that choice easier than ever. They also now have access to some improvements in our communication systems. So folks can sign up for rate announcements. So they get those directly over email or SMS. That wasn't an option in the past. In addition, we obviously share rate information in our newsletter. They can sign up for the newsletter. They can get in touch with customer service. They have multiple emails that they can, you know, contact if need be. So we've really made it easy for customers to get in touch. You know, we have obviously seen some spikes and opt-outs as a result of rates. They haven't been to an alarming degree. The vast majority of our attrition has really been driven by not performing customer refreshes. So the current way the system is set up, when someone moves into City of Portsmouth, rent an apartment, they're not automatically placed on Portsmouth Community Power, even though it's the default provider. They start with the default utility service. And then we have to go through a process to mail and enroll that customer, similar to what is done in the initial program launch. They get the 30-day window to take action. So when our rates became at a disadvantage, we took a pause on doing that. And as a result, we've seen the vast majority of our attrition happen because we're not refreshing like Portsmouth, Dover, Durham. They see a lot of apartment turnover, right? And we're not picking up those people that are moving into the new housing. So we're looking at an opportunity to, you know, utilize that to the advantage of all the programs by, you know, doing sort of a mass refresh enrollment in the spring when it's most advantageous to the portfolio.
Jackson, back even before we went live, I recall trying to raise with the group the fact that our business model was tied to the fact that the utilities went out twice a year.
Right.
And we were going to have this active portfolio management procurement process, which was more sophisticated in line with what the co-op does, et cetera. And that was going to position us for, you know, typically lower rates than the incumbent utilities. There wasn't a whole lot of interest in hearing that potentially the utilities were going to, that their model that was dictated on them. It's not the model that they chose. That was dictated by the PUC and had been in place since 2000. Could change someday, and it quickly has changed since we've gone live. So the playing field has changed.
Correct.
And I know there's a variety of benefits of community power, you know, a voice in Concord on energy policy and other benefits, but the big benefit to the rank and file person is lower rates, right? You know, the average Joe and Jane in Portsmouth is not focused on, you know, maybe renewable projects downstream or, you know, we have a voice in Concord. It's the rates. And, you know, we're now going to be a full year with rates higher than Eversource here in Portsmouth, right? We're in our second rate period right now. We're about 20% higher than Eversource right now, 20%. And it's not really sustainable from a business model. You know, the rank and file resident in these community power programs is going to wake up to the fact that they're paying more. They're not right now. They're not really aware, even though, you know, the website is more user friendly and et cetera, I just know, I've been in this business. The 90% of the residents out there don't realize they're paying more than Eversource right now, right? And they will as every rate period goes by, if we don't get our rates in line,
Yes.
it's not a business model that's sustainable. And
It's not what we've seen from the CCA market nationally.
why would a customer?
Yeah.
Why would you, as a customer in any business, pay more than you have to?
I am right now.
But no, I mean,
Why do you?
I'm not talking about energy, in anything.
Yeah.
Why would you pay more for this product if it's less over here?
Comment.
It's going to,
What are you paying for? Would you buy, okay, here's an example.
but yeah, I hope you're not defending that we're gonna have higher rates going forward, and that's
No.
a good thing.
I don't think that, I think we want to have lower rates to the degree that we can offer lower rates. I am defending the purpose of the coalition in other areas, and what are you paying for? You're paying for, you mentioned some of these things. We are pushing for a more innovative, smarter energy system that will benefit customers in the long term. Yes, they may not be realizing that benefit right now, but it will be helpful for them in the future, and they'll be glad that there was an organization that was pushing for those things on their behalf. We are also working in force with the Public Utilities Commission to ensure that things are being upheld at the PUC in the ways that they should be. I think that is an important service on behalf of customers that is of value to them. They may not see that value directly. Yes, they're paying a bit more in rates right now. You know, we're looking at project opportunities to develop local projects that, yes, again, Kevin, if they're not a local community solar project, maybe they're benefiting the municipality. Okay, so then the taxpayers are seeing the benefit of that municipality paying less in electricity. And there's sort of that double added effect, because now it's not just the customer base, it's the taxpayers that's seeing a benefit from that. There are layers to this, but we are trying to do things to really make a difference here in New Hampshire.
No, there's no question, and all those activities are very noble and important, and an organization without several 100,000 residents behind it paying higher, those activities could still be taking place. Obviously, you have greater leverage when you have a customer base behind you the size of that CPC&H has right now. But and the other, and again, I'm just, one thing that always was during, this was in the Massachusetts market, is we have lots of low-income customers right now in New Hampshire, right? That are coded as low-income customers in the utilities systems for whatever programs they might be on in the state. And I would just strongly advise that in addition to just making your website more friendly and communications, et cetera, that you have targeted outreach to customers that are known low-income customers to make sure that they know they're paying more than they need to be, and make it easy for them to switch and to switch back. But right now you have, in all these communities around New Hampshire, you have low-income customers that are struggling, that are paying more for the utility bill than they need to be. And it's only a matter of time before the Consumer Council or other low-income advocacy groups tumble to the fact that community power is costing low-income customers more than they should be paying. That's a group I would strongly advise you manage with a little more kid gloves than just the mass organization saying, you know, we've made it easier on our website for people to change.
I definitely understand your point of view. Would put some temper to that by explaining perhaps the trajectory that the communities that chose to launch community power outside of the Community Power Coalition, which total over 10 now, where historically, if you were looking, they started at pretty much the same time as the coalition.
Also used broker.
Correct. And at that time, not having the foresight that we all now have, decided to go ahead to set a rate for 24, 30 months at a rate that has yet to actually be lower than utilities. I use that as an explanation of why the marketplace with the current procurement practices of the utilities is distorted. And consequently, there was no intention of those brokers going out to market to buy a higher rate. It was a market rate over that horizon. And it hasn't played out that way. And it somewhat reinforces our position that the artificiality of where we find ourselves today. Another counterpoint to that was in the situation with this current rate period, that rate setting was taking place in June. The three utilities, investor-owned utilities, as you know, all have to submit a rate to the PUC for approval. They can't just set a rate. Typically, that rate is accepted and it goes forward. In June, Liberty did that, but had their rate turned down. And the PUC on record instructed Liberty to put 50% of its under collections through the winter back onto its balance sheet and come back with a better rate, which they did. The rate that Liberty had proposed would have been fairly a lot higher than that of the coalition, and it is now slightly lower than that. It's just an example of the artificiality of where we find ourselves today. And my point is that we can only see in the rearview mirror how things have played out. Jackson spoke to you about the situation in Portsmouth and the aggregate of savings since folks who were enrolled have enjoyed by community power. I am not suggesting that it is a good situation that we're in today, but I'm neither suggesting that it is a situation that is always going to be where we find ourselves and will not reverse. And
I understand.
So-
My point is, I was talking on a specific thing. I think it would be in good form for the coalition to have a particular outreach to low-income customers to get that data from the utilities and to make it easy for them. And I'll tell you that in Massachusetts, this was an issue, okay, by the Attorney General, who's now the governor, at this very topic of competitive supply. Community power is kind of I think a friendlier version of competitive supply. But the very topic of low-income customers unknowingly paying more than they need to, because again, the average person out there is not paying attention to this. And I guarantee you, if you were to sample the low-income customers in New Hampshire right now and ask them, they would think because they're in community power, they're paying less than the utility. And so I would just, before you get told to have a program to have outreach to low-income customers with higher, because of the rates higher, I would just suggest you might do something proactively. That's all.
No, your point's well taken. If
If you lose 20 or 30,000, 40,000 customers, so be it in a rate period. But then make it easy for them to come back on when your rate's lower, in February. But I think that's just a segment, because all these folks have been swept in, they've been aggregated and are unknowingly right now paying more than they need to be. Right now, 20% more. Every low-income customer in Portsmouth right now is paying 20% more than they need to. And the vast majority of them have no idea that they are. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, so your point is well taken, as we said, and if if we're able to access that data, I don't know that we've never been shared.
I'm sure the Consumer Council would support it. The Consumer Council is a big supporter of community power, but is he a big supporter of the fact that low-income customers are paying more than they need to?
Are you referring to the consumer advocate?
Consumer advocate, yeah. Well, I'm sorry, I'm from Connecticut. What's called
Yeah.
Consumer Council.
At consumer ad.
Same thing.
Yeah,
Well, certainly the
Don
consumer-
Crease.
Yes, Don Crease attends in person our board meeting.
Yeah, but is he an advocate of low-income customers paying higher than they need to?
Obviously, the consumer advocate wants customers to pay the least cost that they
Yeah,
can.
right.
He is supportive of
Right.
community power for providing more choice to customers and driving cost competition.
Yeah, okay. This is a niche, but it's a pet peeve of mine.
I
That
understand.
there's a lot of people in the state right now that are paying more than they need to and don't know that the utility rates lower.
And the consumer advocate did write about that, and
Yeah.
Sounded the warning and said you can save money by going back to default.
It's a critical, I spent the last hour before I came here on the phone trying to prevent a client of a nonprofit I'm on from getting shut off. The requests we see for help for electricity shut off is just skyrocketing. They are choosing between food and electricity or heat. So, and I think it's just gonna grow.
And Jackson, you're just the recipient. You're who I can yell at here. I know you're trying to do the right thing, but it's a pet peeve of mine.
Peter?
Yeah, I want to underscore what Kevin's saying. I think as much as we enjoy all the interesting things that the coalition has provided us to do, most people focus on the price, what they're paying for electricity. And they're too busy with their lives. Otherwise, it sounds really like a good idea, so I'll do it. In the meantime, they forget about it and they don't know that maybe now they're paying much more than they have to. So I think price is so important. And I think it's a great idea what Kevin's saying. Why don't we proactively reach out to people who might be struggling and say, hey, we know you're paying more. You might want to consider paying less, and we're welcoming you back anytime you want to be. But let me bring up a couple other ideas here. Number one, I want to know what is happening with Solar 2.0. Can a customer with Solar 2.0 as an Eversource customer come to Community Power Coalition or not? It used to be only 1.0 could do it.
Yeah, so,
Is
we have gotten the legislation passed to allow CBCNH to participate in what's called load reduction. It's basically would be a major shift to net metering that would allow a supplier like
I
ourselves.
don't think it's a bill. I think it's something with the PUC commission, if I'm not mistaken. That's what I was always told. That they're negotiating with Eversource to have customers with 2.0 solar, meaning anyone who had solar after 2017, I
Correct.
believe it is, right?
Metering 2.0.
That they could switch over to our system, and that was being negotiated because it had been a commitment before that everybody could do it. And now 1.0 could do it. And I've been told many times now over the past year that we're all very close to getting 2.0 customers as well. And you're saying you need a bill or you need something
Who
else.
has told you that?
Well, a number of people, and I reached out to a couple of people about this, yeah, so, yeah. So you're saying 2.0 customers cannot switch over to us, is that right?
They can.
Well,
just
but they
do not
won't get credit, yeah,
Correct,
they won't
yes.
get credit for their solar energy,
And-
that's
and-
the point.
And any third party provider is in the same boat.
And what?
Any third party.
Third party
providing
provider,
is
yeah,
in-
I
in
get
the-
that, sure, yeah. No, it was about Eversource
Right.
being able to switch those people over to us.
We have not gotten.
So
customer.
I am saying you guys have not aggressively pursued that.
We are right
Because
now.
people want to switch over to us, specifically an organization like this. These are the kind of people who'd want to switch over to us and they can't
Trust me,
because of the obstacles, okay?
We
So-
understand.
And I was in 1.0 and for a while, they wouldn't even let me switch over with 1.0 when we had the rule in place that we accepted 1.0. It took me several people to override it because I knew that members on the coalition committee were already 1.0 and they were getting switched over. So I really hope that you guys will bring the message back. We need to pursue that and push that.
Yes.
The other thing I was gonna bring up is, in light of the national, well, two things. I recently received an Eversource bill where they told me what the percentage of their renewable energy content was.
Mhm.
And if you remember, a year ago, it was like 24% renewable energy.
On
content.
paper.
Well, yeah, it's all on paper. Our stuff is on paper too. Okay, let's not forget. So now Eversource is saying they're down to 13.4%. So is our option, the lowest cost option for the Community Power Coalition, are we at 13% or are we still at 24% renewable energy?
So the least cost option, Granite Basic,
Yeah.
meets the renewable portfolio standard.
Yes.
Set by the state of New Hampshire. That
Okay.
is the same renewable portfolio standard that applies to utility supply. Okay, it
But
is
every-
lowered effectively due to the unavailability of certain classes of resources within the RPS category. That happens almost every single year.
So,
But our requirement for a least cost product is always gonna be the same as the utility requirement.
okay, so in other words, what you're telling me is a year ago, when we told people we had 24% renewable energy content, like Eversource did in their content, we are now down to 13.4%, just like
It's
Eversource.
not, I don't believe it's 13.4. We publish our environmental,
me to
we publish our
show you my
environmental
bill?
disclosure labels.
Just got my bill a week ago. It's on there. It's on the disclosure list.
I would need to look at your
Okay,
specific.
well, okay, I get back to you on that. Yeah.
The way we had it explained by our Director of Projects and Programs, Mark Bollinger, who manages the renewable energy certificate obligations of the coalition, which is another thing to remember as an added value. We purchased $6.2 million worth of renewable energy certificates on behalf of our members. And we do these office hours that are targeted to specific subjects. And just a few weeks ago, he did one on renewable energy certificates and the marketplace and where things stand. I recall his statement was that the Department of Energy, the New Hampshire Department of Energy, is the entity that dictates the final outcome. The law said that the RPS last year was 24.3%.
Okay.
And this year it's ticked up to 25.2 and will flatline.
New
And
Hampshire law, or were you talking?
New
about-
Hampshire law.
Yes.
It's the New Hampshire Renewable
Yes.
Portfolio Standard. So it was enshrined and started in the early 2000s and was planned to tick up to and then flatline at 25.2. So last year was 25.3. The year before was 23.4. There's always a trailing reconciliation that is done by the New Hampshire Department of Energy, which in most years, it has never been eventually, after it's reconciled, the same percentage as was stated in the RPS.
Sure.
Because of certain unavailability of classes, as Jackson mentioned. But the point is, these decisions on the renewable portfolio standard that pertains to our basic product, this is what is matched to the utility product, tracks to the same methodology. We don't have
I
control.
was telling you a week ago, I got their statement that
Right.
showed the breakdown. It was 13.4%. And a year ago, it was 24%.
Well,
I'm just
that-
asking
that
whether
could
we're
well-
matching this or
Yes,
we
we're
have a
matching it.
different rate.
no, we're not. We are
Okay,
matching.
so we cannot go out and tell our customers, unlike Eversource that has 13.4% renewables, we still have 24%. We have to tell them we are exactly the same as Eversource. Is that right?
And opt up to the higher level.
No, this is just the basic level. I'm just talking about.
That was my point, because we do not have ultimate control on that. What we do have ultimate control in, and what we maintain as a commitment to our customers and our members, is that we not only satisfy our higher level of renewables with renewable energy certificate purchases that match or exceed those stated 33, 50 and 100. Well, obviously it
I
can't
know, we have
exceed
that
100%.
choice. That's one of our good things.
And that's
that
what we have control over.
That's right.
And that's what we have done. And not only have we done that, we haven't done it in any form of underhand way by buying
No.
inexpensive RECs that don't benefit the New Hampshire or New England marketplace, but we buy wind, solar and hydro RECs
Okay.
that directly return revenues back to promote and development of renewables in New Hampshire and New England.
Okay, so I understand that we're matching Eversource, whatever they have, we're matching it.
And I just back on the net metering, I'll belabor.
Right, okay.
You know, that was a couple years ago now. There was a proceeding on the net metering and it's all being thrown into, and we were addressing it, and it, you know, is it an active proceeding still, or like is it?
Talking about 2.0 thing?
Yeah, well, there was more than the 2.0. I think there was a broader net metering,
Yeah.
but
Oh,
it just, this is another example, I think, of, I mean, Peter's on our committee and has solar. And I think it's a topic you've probably raised every meeting in the past 2 years. And it's an opportunity, I think, for proactive communication out to the customers that you know are net meter customers, to keep them up to speed on where this is only a topic,
trust me.
but proactive outreach to customers you know, the Peters of the world would be satisfied if the coalition was keeping him up to speed relative to net metering
And
matters.
Betsy incidentally is 2.0.
Yeah,
Yeah, so we're actually.
because I was telling this group 2 years ago, before I left the board, that, you know, there was all sorts of activity in Concord on these net metering issues.
There has been.
And it's like, but, you know, I don't know where it all went to.
Yeah, no, I mean, we understand that is a priority for the coalition. As the Director of Member Services, I'll be working very closely with our Director of Regulatory and Legislative Affairs to essentially launch a campaign over this next year, heading into too late this session, but for next session, try to resolve this.
Yeah.
That includes direct outreach to NEM customers.
Yeah.
Mobilizing our 68 communities to have a voice, mobilizing our NEM customers to have a voice, and trying to push through a package that enables a smarter system that lets us serve those customers and value their energy in the way that it should be. I mean, we understand this is
Yeah.
a priority
And it, you know, it's
Isn't
been
it-
a couple of years since we've gone live, and those customers were frustrated to go live. And
Exactly.
We're a
Isn't
couple
a-
years into it now.
Isn't an issue with this, though, that the utility wants to take all of the CPCNH solar credits and just dump it
That's
in one
right.
lump to CPCNH, as opposed to having systems that will give the individual solar user his credits.
Well, a problem right now is without what we call load reduction, which I'll do my best to explain. Basically, under the current model, suppliers like CPCNH would have to pay twice. We have to buy the wholesale load obligation for that customer. And then we would have to be purchasing the energy that they're putting onto the grid. We're not able to do that. We need to be able to count the energy that they'd be putting onto the grid as a reduction to our wholesale load obligation to pay them appropriately. Under net metering, all customers effectively are paying for net metering credits that are going to solar. It's a system that isn't ideal by any means, and it effectively undervalues the energy. It undervalues the contributions that those solar producers have to their own local distribution networks. Like, and we're trying to explain this to, you know, legislative body, but it takes time and education to get them up to speed on. We're doing the best we can with that. But I think the more voices we can get as part of that conversation, obviously, the better chances we'll have.
Let me raise one other different topic, if I could. And this is that in light of the national environment politically in this country and the lack of support for renewable energy, I think one of the things that possibly could be a big asset that we as a community coalition would have is, and Exeter is a good example. Here they are, they're about to turn on their solar, I believe, and they have some issues there with the financing or whatever.
Transformers.
Well, yeah, okay, but they're also linked into various funding mechanisms that may be cutting off or not be there when they need it. And it sounds like for the next 2 or 3 years, we might be in a drought of renewable energy funding. And this is a time when maybe the Community Power Coalition could step up and do some projects locally
Yeah.
to say, okay, this is an advantage you have that you wouldn't have if you're just an Eversource customer.
And that's
Okay.
part of what we're trying to accomplish through the annual solicitation program that's being run. And those proposals are being evaluated right now, in a first phase to do exactly that type of activity as it makes sense. You know, it has to make financial sense, it has to
Right.
make logistical
Right.
sense.
We don't want to lose money.
Exactly.
And we did successfully fulfill that first program with Poverty Plains.
Yep.
Poverty Plains is the name of a solar development in Warner, New Hampshire. It's being developed by Encore Renewables. And it is, as we are reliably informed, immune from some of the federal actions right now because it's moving towards steel in the ground. It's met all of the requirements. It was pre-purchased in terms of its materials, so it wouldn't be affected by additional cost unanticipated. And from what we're hearing from the developers, it may even be ahead of schedule of coming on next summer, I guess is the best way to characterize it. And that is nearly 9 million kWh that is being generated in a local community that is a member of the coalition. And we have municipal members participating in that through a group net metering. So we have a broad cross-section of our members municipally going to be benefiting from a 12.5% discount on their electricity bill as soon as that comes in online. So that has the double benefit of being municipal savings, which means it lowers the tax burden. So it does benefit everybody in town, as well as obviously helping the municipality to keep its costs down. So that was the first thing that we were able to bring to market in fairly short order. And I think based upon the success of that, we now have solicitations from 4 different developers that I think have been watching that with interest to see how this plays out. And there's definitely conversations. Tomorrow we have our board meeting and there'll be a conversation about how and which of these may be worthwhile pursuing.
But that's the kind of story we need to put out there. People need to know about that. Most people don't know. I haven't heard about it until you just told me.
Okay,
So, and we're heavily involved in trying to figure.
well, this is what I'm rather hopeful for Portsmouth to also engage. We have our member rep and alternate who get most of our updates and notices. Then folks who sign up for information, either regulatory and or just general information from the coalition, receive that. We started with hundreds, we now have thousands of those emails that go out. I can't tell you, but I could find out there is a good number of people in Portsmouth that will have been signed up and are receiving this information directly. I hope all of you are signed up and are receiving our notices, because
We have 1.3 million population. That's a pittance. Who cares if we're informed? We're already informed.
well, I was rather hoping that you may be the organ through which dissemination of this would happen. You know, you talked a lot about how we will reach out to disadvantaged groups or other folks who are on net metering, but as part of our privacy arrangements with our members, we don't have and don't use customer emails for proactive direct marketing outreach. It's not the way that we developed our process. We have to notify people through the member websites and through our member groups and make sure that the word gets out on the street. I commend you with the work that you did in terms of your rate announcement in the Portsmouth newsletter here. And, you know, we continue to work to support our members in disseminating that. So if there's some additional assistance we can give you, we hired Nicholas Gosling, who is in charge of communications and customer engagement. And, you know, his work is really getting these websites much more functional, much more accessible, and much more productive. Any of you that would choose to go to communitypowernh.gov can get any of the information we've just spoken about. And as I said, your member representatives and anybody else signed up will get the proactive push emails, of which, if anything, we're accused of being somewhat profligate in terms of sending them out. And this is the homepage of Portsmouth Community Power. And right up here, we have news, and all of the information that we're just alluding to is there and has been going out on a regular basis.
And I'll also mention about this project, you know, we're looking at coordinating a groundbreaking ceremony to try to create some media about this. I mean, we have a media strategy as well. We try to get information out to various outlets through press releases. And when it comes to, you know, you know what I'm trying to say.
Yes, yes.
When we turn the array on.
Yes, operational.
Yeah, operationalized, thank you. We're gonna, you know, do another session. We'll have a ribbon cutting. We'll try to get the governor there. You know, we have plans about trying to get that out
Yeah.
there.
Jackson, is there? And I don't know if I've seen one. I thought there's periodic reports to members on cost allocations and.
So glad you
and
asked.
Member benefits and et cetera. And I don't know if I've seen one.
Yep, so we did a full rework of that. You should check out this latest board packet. I was heavily involved with this project with Scott May. We wanted to align the reporting categories closer to what's outlined in the cost sharing agreement than they were previously. And we've now, instead of a stagnant PDF report, there is a workbook that you can filter for your community, and you can see month by month cost breakdowns, savings, energy delivered. You know, everything you could possibly imagine is there. And on a month by month basis in a running workbook format with you know, a summary table that breaks it up by year, and then another tab that's more condensed information for CPCNH as a whole. It is a major improvement to our reporting. It's much more transparent. It's much more detailed. I think we're very excited to show it off literally tomorrow at the board meeting, and that will be the expectation going forward. So we took a pause to like rework all of it and try to get it right before this big re-release.
So I had just two quick questions. Do you have any communities that are launching this coming or anticipated launching this spring? Do you have more communities coming on board? And and I'm asking this because I'm particularly concerned about reserves. I know we're replenishing reserves, but one of the reasons we were so excited about joining the coalition is getting to a point where we had enough reserves to invest in projects in Portsmouth. So we have some solar projects we've talked about considerably, and it would be very helpful to have reserves in place for the city of Portsmouth. So I don't know at what point, when you launch, you automatically need more reserves for some time to cover that cost. At what point are you replenishing, we're done launching, and suddenly we're building some actual reserves.
Okay, sure. So there's a difference between two reserve buckets. There's joint
Right,
reserves,
no,
and then
there's-
there's the discretionary reserve possibility for communities, which is another thing. The joint reserves, really, if we're operating as we should actually never get to the level where they spill over to communities. The reason for that is that means we're charging customers basically too much.
Right.
And so, you know, we try to not do that. There are reserve targets, and we're trying not to exceed those reserve targets as a result. There are discretionary reserve adder, which some communities have taken advantage of, mostly when there's a rate advantage.
Exactly.
Peterborough has continued that on. That's that small, maybe it's 1/10 of a cent that's added onto a rate. Nashua has been very successful with this. They raised over $200,000 to start an energy coaching and you know, energy efficiency pilot project for homeowners, which they're very bullish about the success of that. So there's those sort of two buckets, and then for the launch question, you're right. I mean, there's an initial sort of drawdown that has to occur, but when we then bring on that customer base shortly thereafter and revenues start to flow, that is a good thing overall for the coalition, because more revenue is flowing into the coalition. There are a number of costs that are on a sort of per meter or per count basis. Those costs are more widely distributed because you have more meters and counts that you're serving. And we're looking at, you know, if we were to do a launch of new communities, we do that at a time going forward that it's advantageous to the portfolio. That's typically the spring time. So, you know, we're looking at options there. We're sort of managing expectations. Ultimately, you know, it's a decision of, I'd say, the risk management committee and the board of directors to decide whether that's the right thing to do. But you have to, you know, remember that, you know, we're taking all of these things into account. There are a number of communities, Andrew can speak to them, that would love to launch a program when it's the right time for the coalition to do so. But yeah, we need to manage class flow expectations and only bring on new load when it's going to benefit all the membership.
I assume there's the other flip side is they're not going to launch with rates higher than the incumbent.
Correct.
utility.
I mean, right now, all their EAPs stipulate they'll only launch programs if they offer savings.
Right.
upon launch.
And to the discretionary reviews that the counselor was mentioning, I didn't think it was only if a member community had an adder to their rate. I thought you could also build up discretionary reserves just in the overall management of the
No,
reserve.
that's-
Some went toward the financial stability and eventually some went into discretionary. No,
No.
it all had to be because you increased your rate.
The discretionary
I don't
reserve
recall
are in
that one.
lieu of a for-profit organization holding profits. So the way to look at the joint reserves, as we call them, is that it's increasing the balance sheet of the coalition. It's definitely the intention of at the time when that balance sheet is of significant size, that we would be a bankable entity for investment. And that's the kind of conversation that's been had about how that could benefit members in the future if they brought projects to the coalition, that the coalition would perhaps be an underwriter. It's along the similar lines as what we've been talking to developers about with the Aspire program. But that's the piece of the joint reserves that has any bearing on local development. So discretionary reserves are the only means by which the city of Portsmouth would be able to putting on an adder and then receiving those reserves directly would be benefiting in monetary manner rather than just an asset.
My memory's off then
That's-
because the members could accelerate the buildup of discretionary reserves by an adder. But the original kind of template of the reserve management was the portion that goes into, what's the initial term, the
Joint reserve.
reserves and a portion into discretionary, not with an adder to the rate. That just in terms of managing the procurement process and what's going into rate setting as well as reserves. There was a point in time, and it wasn't at launch, but there was a point in time that some was being shunted to joint reserves and some was going to discretionary reserves. And a community could accelerate discretionary by increasing their rate by, a small amount, as you mentioned.
Right, that was my understanding, is that the reason that we weren't putting money in discretionary reserves initially was because of we had several major launches that occurred when we joined, and because we were one of the early adopters, clearly. And until there were enough joint reserves to cover any concerns around operations, that they wouldn't be putting money in
No,
our discretionary reserves.
I think that's all, it would have been all the joint reserves. They're separate buckets.
Yeah, they
There
were,
is
but
a-
there was a point where
There is a provision
it was
that's called
over
excess
discretionary,
reserve.
but that's,
And that-
you guys aren't anywhere near that.
No.
There's no
No.
hope of that right
There's a
now.
concept
When you-
called excess
Yeah.
reserves that did allow for distribution back to communities, but as Jackson said,
Right.
that was an exception rather than an objective. The idea and the board and the formation documents that I've read, so I'm not sure at what point this
I
was
was very
made.
involved with that.
There was a misconception,
You're-
Kevin.
You're
I
not,
was
you're
involved.
not accurate, Andrew.
No, I
Okay.
don't think so. I think
No.
that exactly
Well, I
what
remember
happened.
the original business plan, which it was gonna take a long time to
It was.
build up just the joint reserves to the point that there was no need for a line of credit to buy power.
Correct.
And the, the coalition could get more favorable financing
Correct.
or self-finance was really the goal.
I mean, that is the goal of having the joint reserves more than anything else.
So I
It
think
was definitely down the road where that would happen,
I was-
the joint reserves were adequate and that we'd be able to then build into discretionary. So it was definitely downstream. But my understanding, it was not, communities didn't have to have an adder in their rate for that to happen.
At least in the
But
business,
we're not anywhere near that. So.
the business plan, it was gonna be years out.
Well, the 3 and 5 year horizons that you're referring to are the 60-day target. The 60-day target is just taking a responsible view to having sufficient assets to maintain the creditworthiness of the coalition and all of the potential threats and risks that we face in the volatile marketplace. 120 days is the goal that we do not want to exceed, because that is when not only do we have the creditworthiness, but we have the asset base to become a load-serving entity ourselves. Once you can become a load-serving entity, you can cut out middle parties who are not non-profit, and they do take a fee for being in lieu of that role of load-serving entity.
At that 120 point, Andrew, my recollection was then in future rate periods, if we were still at that 120, that the coalition would be able to dump monies into the discretionary reserve of member communities.
And that is where I'm referring to the concept of excess reserves. So perhaps we've got ourselves a little bit tied up in terminology, but that is the scenario that you're talking about, that certainly the board has adopted a policy that we don't see that as a normal course of business, that it is in order not to overburden our members with additional accrual reserves, that when accounting is done, if it was found that that had been exceeded, then those reserves will be distributed to get us back down to that target. But I would defer to you. I was not in the room at meetings you were. I'm just saying that has not been something that has been promulgated as a concept for the time that I've been talking to new members in this community. And as we've all agreed, we had to press a reset. So that has actually gone back into the longer term horizons of 3 and 5 years from where we sit today. But most importantly, it just, your question, Councillor, about launches, that there has been a lot of learning. I think something that we may not have talked about in the right context today was that all of these ideas and policies were all developed before a launch, before the real rubber hit the road. There has been unfortunate confluence of external factors that meant that we were unfortunate and had to draw down on reserves through a variety of factors. But in that time, we would have always have reviewed what we have done and the learnings that we've received. In 2024, as I mentioned, we launched 44 communities. There was, ahead of steam, there was a great deal of optimism and a great deal of interest, and our members wanted to get launched, and we did our best to meet their needs. In hindsight, some of those decisions disadvantaged us and exposed us when we were underwater, and we would have been in a stronger position had we said no. I don't think anybody would deny that. So what Jackson's referring to is the learnings of that is that we would not, for example, probably embark upon a late year launch, even if we beat the rates of the utility, because there are implications and a longer runway, if you will, to those communities contributing to the coalition. But that doesn't mean that we don't want to put ourselves in a position to disadvantage our existing operating members. But notwithstanding that, yes, we do want to launch. We have 10 communities of what we call on deck. They've gone through all the process that Portsmouth went through and signed the contracts, and they are now awaiting the opportunity to launch. And we would like to do that at the earliest opportunity, but again, much in the mind of the learning that we've had in the last 2.5 years about the repercussions of that. That's the best answer I can give you. So the answer to those communities that I sit and talk to on a daily basis, when's it happening, Andrew? We want to keep the optimism there, but we don't want to make false promises, and we will have to evaluate things as the market and opportunities arise. The alternative model to the coalition's community power, as I told you before, had up to now, only met the basic requirements of the law in terms of they did not launch unless rates were lower. I won't get into the sort of details of that, but they did launch, but then rates have always been at a disadvantage to the utilities because of the artificiality of the rates current now. The market will change, and perhaps that may become a smarter move in the future. And that's what Jackson was alluding to earlier in terms of we're not wedded or by statute required to procure power in lockstep to the utilities. We just felt at the time that it was the apples and apples, easy comparison for those consumers to understand what rates were. And it's not a sort of obfuscation of like, well, you've got to figure it out over time. And, you know, what was basically the only offer of competitive supply in the marketplace before community power was offered. You talked about Massachusetts, $500 million was what was being bandied around by their office of a budgetary office when they engaged with the legislature. But I remember a senator saying, you know, third-party providers were meant to bring competitive marketplaces and lower rates. The one shining light in the competitive marketplace is community power, because they do see the difference in Massachusetts. And I don't think they were really looking at those malpractices. They were looking at the malpractices of the people going door to door in low-income communities and signing people up even if they hadn't even agreed to do so. And then doing this sort of bait and switch that we've even seen, unfortunately, in this state, where third-party providers will provide you with teaser rates. In my bag here, I have call now for your $100 gift card. Not a mention. Oh, you've got one. Yes. And that's the business that we're not in. And your point is well taken that we can always do better with communications, but we're never going to be these organizations. We're never
There's
going to
different
be,
flavors. There's, as you described, that's been the Wild West forever.
right?
But then you have aggregations similar to the competitive aggregations that have happened in some of the communities here in New Hampshire, and that's pretty much the model in Massachusetts, other than the Cape Compact. You know, that's a different flavor. But again, there was concern over those aggregations where people were locked in. Some of those aggregations were for 12 months, not for 6. And you had low-income customers, you know, I'm like a broken record here, but that were locked into paying higher rates for 12 months compared to the incumbent utility. So, you know, I circle back to that. I just suggest you on that topic, you be a little bit proactive and sensitive to that topic. That's all.
I'm gonna do just a time check for us.
Question.
Yeah,
Mr. Hatch, you used the word artificial a couple of times. Can you help me understand what you mean by that?
In context of what?
The market is having an artificial construct that is benefiting someone.
Well, I mean artificial in terms of the nature of the change of procurement practice ordered by the PUC in order to put a rate out there that is, you know, we're not picking this term to be inflammatory. The utilities use the term proxy rates because by their own admission, they can't set a real rate that has a risk premium. It is a rate that is hopeful that they might be able to cover their costs, but if it
I
doesn't,
understand.
so that's what I meant by an artificial market.
Appreciate that. Wait till the capacity market goes to prompt. It's all gonna be proxy.
Yeah.
Curious to hear more about that. Follow-up question to Ben's. There was talk of some lobbying effort that if the utilities like Liberty undershot and had to recover money, that they had to do it within a year, that we were gonna lobby for that. How are our efforts doing at that? Because the PUC has allowed these utilities to price at a loss and then push off the recovery into the future, which I think makes a competitive disadvantage for community.
I think it's perhaps more factual to say that they have been ordered to do that rather than they choose to do it. I wouldn't imagine that a for-profit investor-owned utility that isn't allowed by statute to profit from providing default supply. It's purely a service that was agreed upon in order for them to be able to be a monopoly provider on the delivery side. I wouldn't imagine that any CEO would have the appetite to carry that on a balance sheet. I would go so far as to suggest that CEOs talking to the folks in Liberty had a particular problem with that. And that's why Liberty were at a New Hampshire level, pushing so hard to actually not carry unreconciled losses and to actually clean out their balance sheet in the same, the next rate period. I think, we need to be careful of, who's ordering who.
Right. But just tell us what you think might happen in terms of legislative remedies around that.
Well, I think there's a lot of focus on that. We just heard an update from our Director of Regulatory and Legislative Affairs recently that, there's sort of movement to push for reconciliation true-ups that occur the next period.
The next period.
Correct. Yeah. So that they could not be pushed out and potentially washed out, that they would be more of a, immediate true-up process.
Jackson, I was taking a peek at your website today, the landing page at least of your website, and it is definitely spruced up, and it's nice.
How do you do that?
But I did see the positions on a brighter note for you guys in terms of the new positions you're bringing on. Can you say a little bit about the status of that? And the one thing I did notice is I thought we had a report from Tom Reedy that you were hiring a finance person, and I didn't see that
Yeah,
position.
that had been discussed, but is not being hired for at the moment.
Okay. So who is responsible for, it was always I have a lot of pet peeves that the financial side of the operation was being run by a board member in my time.
Well,
And
early days.
well, even later days. And so who is responsible for the finances? What position in the organization is responsible
Yeah.
for financial matters?
There's
Particularly after what you've all experienced, why was that
Yeah.
position kind of jettisoned then?
So the essentially all of our costs, the vast majority of our costs are on the energy side. 90%, right? So we're hiring for a director of power operations. That person is responsible for that 90% of where our costs go. So that was part of the decision-making framework. When putting off the finance director hire, that there would be a lot of financial authority on this director.
If you have separation of duties, he or she is responsible for procurement. You want individuals that are responsible for analyzing budget to actual and
Correct.
why do we have variances,
Cash.
et
So
cetera.
we
So
have an entire accounting team, Eco CFO, they're professional accountants that we use to.
it's an outside firm.
It is an outside firm for the time being, but they're filling that gap. We have a lot of capacity that we've had to outsource and we're starting to internalize. The director of power operations is an internalization of a lot of services we got from Community Choice Partners, Samuel Golding. We're bringing that in-house. The executive director, we currently have an acting general manager that's serving that role. So there should be an open search for an executive director. That executive and currently the AGM holds a lot of responsibility for Coalition's finances. So, we have lots of people looking at this. Calpine obviously has to look at our finances. They're the financier in many ways in terms of
Yeah.
what we do in terms of power supply. You understand this.
No, I would think you'd have a point person for financial
I get
matters
that.
inside.
Yeah, and I think that is
Everybody's saying, well, everybody's got a little bit of a financial hat.
I totally agree with you, Kevin, and it was discussed. There was a whole hiring committee that went through many months of process. And, we are looking at that as it is a priority. It was just higher priority based on a couple of these other executive level positions.
Okay. We've taken a lot of your time. You've been very patient.
This is what we're here for.
Unless there's any other burning questions, Ben, Tracy?
I'd love to dive in deep, but it's probably not appropriate this time.
Um,
I mean, I want to know the strategy for active management. I want to understand this cash flow model.
um, I think that
Will you have time to zoom into the board meeting tomorrow? It starts.
Unfortunately, not. Unfortunately,
That, but you know, obviously, there's a lot of conversation that's very germane to that.
right.
We are subject to 91A, so I mean, we are a open book in terms of how things are managed. And if you have particular interest to, you know, find out more, please be encouraged to reach out directly, and perhaps we can do one-on-one and put you in touch with people better served than Jackson and myself to really get into as much detail as you so care.
I think I'd like to do that.
Great.
I think that would be great if you did that for us.
Yeah. Because we really appreciate you coming tonight, and I know that the seat is hot. It is.
It's heated.
And what's behind all of our
Ours are not.
questions and concerns is that we want you to be successful.
Mhm.
But we have a fiduciary responsibility to the city. We need to be persuaded that adequate changes have been made.
Right.
Understood.
And we're just not, I just don't know if we're there yet. So that's what's behind a lot of our questioning. Please don't misunderstand us. We appreciate you coming to talk to us. I get the hot seat.
Well, yeah, again, I mean, this is a service that we provide our members. When you ask us to show up, we'll show up, address your questions to the best of our ability, and we'll always do that for you.
Well,
So,
we are you and you are us.
yeah,
That's right.
In the big picture.
exactly.
Yeah. You know, so we're all,
And to that end, you know, obviously, we were delighted to see that Gillian Harris has signed up to come to the member meeting on the 24th. I would encourage others from Portsmouth to come. You are not restricted to a member rep or an alternate. We don't have a lot of dry material to be dealing with. It's very member focused and an open dialogue about many of the things that it's hopefully going to have folks coming to bring some of their concerns and act like we are, which is a member-driven organization. This is Portsmouth Community Power you are managing here, and we are here to assist you in that endeavor.
yeah. And, again, we're grateful for your time. And whatever further investigation you'd like to do. After the committee because of your specialized knowledge.
I need to check with council, gotten slapped on the wrist once or twice, so I work for the big utility.
I read your profile.
So thank you. Anything else? Let Jackson and Andrew go.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we'll continue watching the reserves.
Yes, yes, you will.
We know the trajectory you planned for it, and I have confidence. And a good plan to rebuild those. Thank you for saying. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll be into the 6th or 7th inning by now. One more item. I'm gonna just share with you and get some thoughts. Cause couldn't get this in the package because I only developed it. The legal folks on Monday evening. At our last meeting, we talked about making the Energy Advisory Committee permanent.
Take with you.
And the sense was,
Okay.
make it permanent, but have an interlock with sustainability. Looked at totally independent. We looked at interlocked with sustainability. We looked at subcommittee of sustainability. And there's arguments both ways. The input from the city manager and the staff was, it's difficult always to staff and support new committees. But I did meet with the city manager and Peter Britz, and we reviewed the work of the past two years. And also, our priorities that we set way back in February of 24. And there's a clear program of work for our committee that's different than sustainability. And we have certain expertise that's not present with sustainability. And we can be a great help to the city, as Councilor Cook pointed out. We don't have an energy manager, but we have the expertise in this group to provide a lot of assistance. So Karen decided that it was okay for us to look at being made permanent. But I think I wanted, before we put language around that, to give to the council. The mission originally was just to launch community power. And if you go back to the original motion, that was what it was about. We set new priorities when everybody was reappointed by the mayor this term. And that was our setting priorities exercise we did. We did completely fill the council in writing with updates on that, May 6th of 24, about those priorities. So this was a stab at a mission statement that was very simple, and powers and duties. And I just wanted to get everybody's input on this. The mission of the Energy Advisory Committee is to give a lower cost, lower carbon energy future to our residents. Fairly broad. And then powers and duties: oversee and continue to implement Portsmouth Community Power. And there's additional stuff hung on that. Advise the city council on community power related decisions. Advise the council on ways to reduce municipal energy costs and greenhouse gas emissions. Provide technical advice on city energy efficiency strategies and options. Educate the community on energy efficiency and carbon reduction. So that was the first stab. And I'd love people's input. It's late. We've had a long night, but if we move ahead of this,
I think maybe, I don't know if you mentioned it, but maybe underscoring to provide more choices for renewable energy options. So not just greenhouse gas emissions versus price, but also choices in the quality of the energy.
Okay.
So.
Yeah.
That's all I
more
would.
choices.
Yeah.
In the first bullet, Counselor, I might just suggest, community power then implement it. It might be oversee the ongoing operations of community power.
Right.
Yeah, oversee operations.
Oh.
That's good. Counselor, with your governance hat.
The only thing that I would say is it would be nice to reference the city's energy contracts here somewhere. Guidance on contracting,
Okay.
because we usually lock in these 2-3 year contracts.
Yeah.
And and then we're stuck. So it'd be helpful if
Okay.
this committee had could provide some input.
Good.
I think, just to piggyback on that idea, I think if we're gonna have such a committee, then it seems to me everything that is energy related, that the city's planning to do, any department's planning to do, should at least have some kind of presentation to this committee to say, this is what we're planning to do. Is there anything we should know or do differently? Perhaps doesn't have to be obligatory that they have to follow that guidance, but it should be somehow keeping this committee informed that somebody's doing something in some building somewhere. And maybe we think it's a bad idea for some reason, or maybe it's okay, but just to make sure we're not blindsided by something that's happening.
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky because, you know, in our council manager form of government, the manager and her staff have a great deal of
I understand.
day-to-day operational
Yeah.
decision-making power.
I mean, I keep in my, back in my mind, always the Spinnaker Point facility. Things happen there that I see and I think, oh my gosh, why did you do this? And maybe there's a good reason, okay, but I'm saying, should not somebody have discussed this before you did it, you know?
I think we can be a resource.
Yeah, that's all, that's what I'm looking at more.
And
Resource.
I would even, to what Counselor K was just saying around the city's procurement, I think we're a resource. Obviously, that's a DPW
Yeah.
activity to manage
Yeah.
and, you know, we're not getting ourselves kind of in the line of that, but just as we're a resource, right?
So for example, if the city could lean on this committee to send a representative, say if you have an RFP out for a new energy efficient project and you want some expertise, this committee could provide someone to sit on that RFP, that review process for proposals.
Yeah.
And someone on this committee might have a better knowledge of the providers in the area too, and can provide that level of expertise that our staff does not always have.
Maybe be a resource for city procurement of energy and energy choices.
And last meeting, I did mention the balcony solar, just to update you all. I have 75% of the parts now on my site. I plan within the next 2 weeks to have it up and running. So I'll let everybody know who wants to come out and view it at some point.
Yeah. You can get you some
I
free
would
and
like to
friendly
view myself
publicity.
doing something.
On the document here, maybe the penultimate bullet, we could provide technical advice on energy efficiency strategies, on electrification, on local resource development. I see the including recommending local projects in the first bullet.
Mhm.
Whether it's through community power or not was kind of what I was going at. If there are local energy projects,
Separate.
if requested, provide technical
Sure.
advice. So just trying to broaden the scope of the penultimate bullet, that's all.
Provide technical advice on energy,
And all things energy, including energy
Strategy,
efficiency,
electrification.
and local resource development.
Even better.
Otherwise, I think that this is good. It's concise, it's good.
It was early in the morning.
No, it's good.
It's good.
The given the mission is strong, but I think given that it's a mission,
Right.
it's okay.
Yes.
And Counselor, you mentioned at the beginning, or he is going to be resigning or he has
He
resigned?
has resigned and I tried to reach him twice. I haven't been able to talk to him yet. I'm sure I could give you more information than that.
That's a loss.
It's a loss.
Yes.
Good guy.
And he provided such a great benefit with the NREL work.
Yeah, I know. And saw that to the finish line,
Mhm.
which was great.
Council Tabor, can I just bring up something I mentioned last time about protecting solar energy in this town? I've got a picture here. I'm gonna circulate this from Hanover Street of a house that has solar collectors on its roof and a big hole next door where a new building is gonna be built. That building is tall enough, it will take away the solar energy from that neighbor.
Okay.
And it seems to me that if we want to encourage solar energy in our town, it would be, there's a reverse page on the other side. It would be a good idea if we can do something to protect people either who have solar energy already or who wish to have it in the future from it being precluded by a building next door to them that shades their roof, for example.
Kind of like a
Just
view
an
shed
idea.
protection concept,
Excuse me?
similar to a view shed protection concept. Like you can't build in front of my view.
Oh my gosh,
That, sure, yes, maybe.
this is a thing and that's it.
Similar to it.
Yeah, it is,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
But I think that's just, I happened to stumble across it because I was taking care of this poplar garden there, and then they said, oh, we have a building that was just demolished next to us. And you can see from the configuration, it wouldn't take a lot for them all of a sudden to have their solar collector shaded.
You'd need a lot of, well, this is just me talking, but I think if the committee undertook that, there'd need to be a lot of community engagement because
I think the sustainability
There's two
committee
view-
might be.
few views on that.
Yes.
I have one other thing for us as well. There was an email, I don't know how many people saw from Clean Energy New Hampshire, that shockingly, SoulSmart had extra funding from the federal government to use up. At the end of the year, I know, how does this happen?
It's in my queue and I haven't read it yet.
I know, so they asked for us to get in touch with them by October if we want SoulSmart to do free work on feasibility assessments around solar projects. So it might be worth checking in if we're getting,
Actually, through
something.
the Island Institute.
yeah, it might be worth just checking. Yeah. And you can either contact through Clean Energy New Hampshire, or you can contact SoulSmart directly. So we have that contact, but they said by October, by end of October. Okay, so if we can get, even if we could get some assistance with funding for our current Jones Avenue project, like even if they,
Yeah.
you know, anything where we could get some assistance.
Certainly.
And that contracting for Jones Avenue support is still ongoing. We have more, give you more. Thank you, everybody.
Did we have to approve the minutes?
Oh, Stephanie. It's not.
Yes.
Okay, let's do that. You're gonna head and check, read them? Yes.
There was one, just, I think should get corrected. There was a reference to Clifton Below and Lisa Sweet saying they didn't support the
Yes,
hiring
that's
of
right.
executive director. It was, I think, Stephanie, was really the timing of hiring an executive director.
Yeah, that wasn't clear, thank you.
Yeah, it was just the timing of it.
Timing.
I think they thought the other positions, including the finance position, were more important, and that Henry was doing a sufficient job, and they wanted to focus on those other positions first. It wasn't that they didn't want the position, yeah,
Yeah.
that was the only thing I was, they look good.
Does approve the minutes as amended?
So moved.
Second,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
This was, you were doing the job and
Very good, good questions. Really appreciated that. And everyone.
Dementia has not hit you.
What's that?
Dementia has not hit you yet.
It's right around the corner.